Huh.
Oh, I think you.
Do I have to
What?
hit that link to hit the rest of them?
G-
They were there.
it was there, somebody erased it.
No. Slide 34.
Is it
It
there?
looks like it's like locked on the side of it, like I can see it, but it doesn't look like it would come through on the presentation.
Well, click with the mouse on that link and they'll all come up. Here.
I mean, I can wing it, I just,
That's what I'm saying. There's
I
so
have it all in
many
front of me,
they're not
it's just if you guys wanna visually see it while we're doing it.
That doesn't see how they were here.
The slide is the slide is skipped while presented.
Sorry. I didn't really look at that. Well, why he is doing that, I don't necessarily
Here,
need
hold
the
on.
slide.
If you just give me a second, then you can refresh. Go ahead, sorry.
I was just gonna say, to give you a little bit of information about myself, I have my bachelor's degree from Doane Crete in business administration. And at that time, they did not have a human resources emphasis. I had to do a self-designed portion of that in order to get that, I guess, on my resume. At this point, I think they've changed their curriculum, and so you can actually get just an HR degree. With that, then, before I graduated from college, I actually got a job there locally at the Nestle Friskies Pet Care Plant. It did change over to Nestle as an HR assistant, which I'll talk about in a minute. But through them, they had tuition reimbursement, so I thought, hey, why not? I'll go back, get my master's degree. And my master's degree is also through Joan Lincoln, the Master's of Arts in Management program. And I decided to stop there. I thought 2 degrees from Doane was enough for me, even though Chad is working on his 5th. From there, I also have a certification from the Professional and Human Resources Certificate from the HRCI Institute, and then also the Society for Human Resource Management. I have that certification as well. Are they needed in my job today? Probably not. If I ever probably wanted to come work in Lincoln or Omaha, it probably would be really helpful to have something like that. Is it working?
We're getting there.
So at Crete, at the Friskies Pet Care Facility, as I started my HR career there, actually before I graduated from Doane, a lot of that was just introductory stuff. That was a union facility, you know, in education. Obviously, you got the teachers' union, so I'm well familiar with how the union environment works. Along with that, I was able to kind of start in an assistant position and work my way into more responsibilities there. So when I first started, I did a lot of the introductory stuff. Thank you. I don't like doing it too well, so I appreciate it. All right. There we go. So there's the Friskies Pet Care information. We had about 400 employees at that location, and I did everything from payroll to the newsletter to working on union grievances, kind of got my first taste with that and how to respond to those. From there, Chad got a principal position out in Kimball, Nebraska, which I'm from Potter originally, so that was only 30 minutes from my parents, so it was a great move for us to be out there closer to my family. We were out in Kimball for 5 years, and at that time there was not an HR position available, so I took a job with the Chamber of Commerce as their executive director. I was there for only about a year, and then a HR position did come up with a local tri-state cooperative. And so we had locations in Wyoming, Colorado, and Nebraska. So not only did I need to know all of the Nebraska laws and regulations, I also had to know Colorado and Wyoming as well. And in that position, I got to wear a safety hat as well, so I did a lot with drivers and all the good things that go along with that, as well as just some credit management on the office side. It was a very small company, only 85 employees, so I had to wear a lot of hats in that particular position. From there, he took a principal job in Seward, Nebraska. That was in 2007, and I was fortunate enough to find a position in Seward, and I've been there ever since. So I am the Human Resources Manager at Hughes Brothers. We are a manufacturing company, and we are also union there as well. In this role, it's a little bit different because I do have a strong support staff of some other functions that work with me. So we have a separate environmental and safety manager. So it's nice that I'm not solely responsible for all that, even though I'm heavily involved in the workers' compensation side. He takes care of all the safety meetings and all the EPA regulations and all those kind of reports that have to be turned in on a quarterly and annual basis as well. In addition, I have a full-time payroll coordinator that works with me as well. So like I said, I'm more of a generalist now and oversee a lot of those functions. I'm not going to click on the factory tour now, but if you had a chance, it's just a quick 2-minute video about what we do at Hughes Brothers. We manufacture transmission and distribution materials. It's kind of interesting because not a lot of people realize Seward, Nebraska is responsible for most of the power lines that run across the state of Nebraska. So that's what we do. One of the interesting things too, as I was working through this, since I have been there almost 11 years, I thought, you know, I want to look and see how many different people have I hired and separated in that time frame, just to kind of give me a little bit more, I guess, of a baseline here. So in that time, I have hired 155 employees over the last 11 years and had 178 different separations, which was a lot more than I thought it was. You don't remember from year to year how many different people you go through. We peaked at 306 employees back in 2012, and we're actually down about 275 employees right now. But we are very busy. Anytime there's an ice storm, a hurricane, a fire, a lot of those natural disasters unfortunately drive our business as well. Just like you have a lot of different probably positions within your school district. Some are custodians that don't need degrees, some do need a degree. And so same with us, we look at lots of different things there as well. I'm not going to go through all of those. But what we're talking about today, and what I guess you've been studying today, is just looking at human resource management in general. So what does that all encompass? You know, not only in your school, but in any business, the policies, the practices, the procedures, all those systems that are in place to help you get from point A to point Z successfully. And I know that can change in every organization because you do have to find what works best for your school district or your business or whatever that might be. Obviously, there's going to be certain things in place, like how you have to handle overtime, because the Fair Labor Standards Act says this is how you have to do that. So there's those other things that you have to be aware of, and making sure they're working within what your personal mission statement, vision statement, your goals are for your teachers and your staff members. So I kind of put it in, you know, what's my top 10 list? Again, this is not all-inclusive. This is probably where I spend a majority of my time. And so we're going to talk about each of these things a little bit more in detail. Again, if anybody has questions, suggestions, stories that you want to throw in, please feel free to do that as well. So from an employment and recruiting standpoint, I mean, and I put this as number one, just because, you know, first of all, employees are our greatest assets. If we do not have the right people in the right places, as some of you probably have read that story, the bus is going to go to the wrong place, right? So that's one of the things that I think that is important to spend a lot of time on is how do you recruit and fill those openings that you have. I like to use a structured interview process. And what I mean by that is I have the same set of questions that I use with every applicant that comes in the door. And that might get tweaked a little bit depending on the level of education that person might need, you know, what the responsibilities are. Obviously, when I hired a vice president controller position, I had a lot more involvement from other key players in that particular interview process than I do with a welder that I'm hiring or a machine operator that I'm hiring. But I still use a lot of the same questions from the entry-level position that I do to the CFO. For example, some of the situational questions give you a good feel of their background. You know, whether it is, you know, tell me about a conflict that you've had with a coworker and how you resolved it. You know, everyone has assets and liabilities, strengths and weaknesses. You know, what are your 3 strengths? And give me examples of how you use them. I mean, obviously things that you all probably are using today. But it's good to find some situational and hypothetical questions to make sure you're gaining some of that information as well. And a consistent practice is also going to help you avoid discrimination should you ever be faced with that. Especially if you have, you know, a person who thinks they're qualified for that role and then you end up not hiring them. How are you going to defend yourself if they do potentially file litigation against you because they felt they were the best qualified candidate for that position? So something to think about. So there are some do's and don'ts, some illegal questions that you cannot ask. I did include with one of the resource folders, I think that you put out there for them, a couple examples of legal and illegal questions. And I bring that up because, you know, some people just don't maybe always realize that there are certain things that you cannot ask in an interview. Obviously, some of the key areas, disability, age, nationality, religion. I do find it interesting, though, that being through this with Chad, going through a superintendent interview, one of the things that kind of caught me off guard when we went and interviewed at David City is they did say, bring your family, your wife up for this process because we're going to have time to meet with everybody. And I'm like, how can they do that? They can't ask you if you're married, And so I kind of had a little bit of a, why are they doing this? And he's like, no, you're coming with me because it's going to make a difference to know that, we have kids that are going to be in this school system and that we have a vested interest in the school district and things of that nature. So sometimes it's hard for me to shut my HR brain off because there are a few things in education that are a little bit different. However, I'm sure it was just more an optional thing. If you are married, bring your wife and your kids so they can participate in this. As you well know, when you're hiring teachers that are married, potentially, you want their family to like that area so they stay there for a while. But you can't legally ask them, are you married? Another example of this is when we moved to Seward, I actually just recently found out that I was expecting our third child. Well, I was not about to tell them in an interview that I was pregnant. I mean, I wasn't showing, obviously, but the thing is as much as we want to say that it doesn't impact a decision, it does. If you're hiring a teacher and that teacher is, 7 months pregnant and is going to miss the first 3 months of school, that's probably going to impact your decision. But should it? You want to make sure you're hiring the best candidate for that job. And you cannot, because it's illegal for you to discriminate against a pregnant woman. So, those are some of the things that you have to think about is you do have to make sure you're still finding the best candidate for that position. Any questions, or anybody else have any situations that have come up like that before?
What about arrest record?
In education,
In your
you do
case?
have a little bit of an exemption there.
Is this a personal question?
Well, no, it was listed
No,
on there, and I
I-
was like, I know we asked, I know
Yes.
that's on their application, so
It
I know
is,
that.
and that is one of the main differences
Not mine.
between education and the business world, is that you obviously, because you're dealing with children as your primary business, you do have a right to at least have the background check done. Now, you have to be careful in how you actually might ask some of those questions as well, because definitely if they've had any felonies or any activity that involved that, that's obviously disqualifies them from employment. So yes, that is one main exception to that. Now, I will tell you that one of my hiring practices is that I do a background check with every candidate, but that's after I've already offered them the job. So post-offer, I can do the physical, the background check, the drug screen, all of those things, but I can't do that before I make an offer. So, but again, a lot of times it's a lot of money invested in that process, but again, I think it's critical because I have had, probably a dozen people over the last 10 years that didn't pass their pre-employment drug screen, and I'm glad that I spent the money to have that not become a problem in the workplace. So good question.
So you can
Anybody else?
withdraw that offer if you
Yes.
go?
Because when I sit down and meet with an employee, I tell them, and they sign off that their offer is contingent upon them passing their pre-employment drug screen, their background check, and their physical. So they actually sign a document for me before I set those appointments up, so that I can revoke that offer. So, and I don't know that you have to have it in writing, but it definitely makes that process a lot cleaner, should they try to argue, that point. And there's been a few people that didn't pass the drug test that are like, well, can I apply again next year? Well, you can apply, but I'm probably not gonna, hire
The
you.
same drug
You didn't
test,
pass it
yeah.
the first time, So it does raise a challenge for that. So, anybody else on that?
Any of those documents she's talking about, you have them on Blackboard in a zip file? So.
Yeah, and like I said, one of them is not even mine, it's from another university, but it had a really great way to show you what is a legal way to ask that question. For example, you can't ask somebody how many work comp injuries they had last year. But you can say, tell me about your personal safety record and how do you feel about safety? You can find ways to ask questions to still gain information about them. One of the other things I think that's helpful too, when I have managers actually sitting in on the interview process with me, I tell them write quotes, not notes. So when we go back and look at what that person might have said, it's a better way for you to remember that that's actually how they said it to you. Because if you're interviewing like in my case, I interview sometimes 10 or 12 candidates to try to hire a couple of welders.